I want you to try a little thought experiment to start things off today.
Oh, I love a good thought experiment.
Right. So I want you to completely reimagine your physical body. Because if you're like most people, you probably carry around this very standard anatomical model in your head.
Yeah, like the skeleton is the structural scaffolding, right?
Exactly. The bones are scaffolding, the muscles operate like this system of mechanical pulleys, and the heart is, well, it's this tireless central engine driving the whole machine.
It's a very dry, mechanical way of looking at it.
It really is. So for the next hour or so, I want you to stop thinking of your body as this solid, dry, mechanical entity. Instead, I want you to picture yourself as a walking aquarium.
A walking aquarium. I mean, it sounds a bit abstract at first, but from a purely biological perspective, that is actually a far more accurate representation of how we function.
Is it really?
Oh, absolutely. At our core, we are aquatic environments. I mean, the cells that make up your tissues and your organs, they aren't just stacked on top of each other like dry bricks.
Right, they aren't just rubbing together.
No, they are suspended. They're constantly bathed in fluid.
Think about that for a second. You safely walk around on dry land every single day only because you essentially brought the ocean with you when you evolved.
Yeah, it's wild when you phrase it like that.
And our bodily fluids are incredibly similar in composition to seawater, aren't they?
Very similar, yeah. It's salty, it's highly nutrient dense, and crucially, it is constantly flowing.
So we're this interconnected, enclosed, aquatic ecosystem. And just like any physical aquarium you might have, sitting in your living room, if you want whatever's living inside it to thrive, you have to do some maintenance.
You have to clean the water.
Exactly. In this case, your trillions of cells are the fish.
Yeah.
And you have to keep that water meticulously clean, and you have to keep it moving.
And that concept, maintaining that internal water quality, that is just the perfect gateway into what we are unpacking today on this deep dive.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because we are exploring the entire bodily network that's responsible for keeping that internal ocean from turning into, well, basically a stagnant swamp.
We are diving deep into the lymphatic system.
The lymphatic system. It is so frequently overlooked, I feel like.
Oh, terribly.
I was reading through the clinical history for this, and doctors literally used to call it the Cinderella of medicine.
The Cinderella of medicine. I love that. It's so fitting.
It really is, right? It's down there in the dirt doing all the heavy, grueling lifting. It's cleaning up the toxic messes in the background while the cardiovascular system gets all the attention.
Yeah, the heart, the red blood cells, the major arteries, they get the glory, they get the research funding, and, the glass slippers.
Meanwhile, the lymph is just sweeping the floors.
That's historically accurate, honestly. The cardiovascular system has dominated anatomical research for centuries.
Why do you think that is?
Well, if you look back at the literature, clinicians and scientists mostly treated the lymphatic network as a secondary thing, like an almost passive sewer pipe.
Just a subordinate to the blood vessels.
Exactly. But the paradigm in modern immunology, and especially in longevity science, is undergoing this massive shift right now.
Because we're realizing they're connected.
We are realizing that you literally cannot separate the health of the blood from the health of the lymph. They are a singular functional unit.
So today, our mission for this deep dive is to explore this hidden network. We're going to look at it from every possible angle.
Biologically, anatomically, psychologically, and metabolically.
Yes, all of it.
Yeah.
Because we need to understand how optimizing the flow of your lymphatic system isn't just a nice bonus. It serves as a fundamental, non-negotiable mechanism for human longevity.
And for long-term vitality, yeah. That longevity aspect is really the core thesis I hope we can press upon the listener today.
Because it's not just about, dealing with a swollen ankle.
Right, or just avoiding a cold. Keeping this internal river clear of cellular waste and inflammatory debris, that is a proactive, absolutely essential habit for graceful aging.
It's the literal foundation of extending your healthy lifespan.
Exactly, through continuous daily cellular purification.
Okay, so let's start by actually mapping this out. Because before we can learn how to manipulate and optimize our internal aquarium, we have to understand what it actually looks like.
And how it differs from the circulatory system that we all learn about in, middle school biology.
Right. And to appreciate the structure, I think it helps to look at how we even figured out it was in there to begin with. Medical history gives us a really fascinating lens here.
It really does. Because in the 4th century BCE, the Greek physician Hippocrates actually noted the existence of this system.
Wait, Hippocrates knew about the lymph.
He did, yeah. He observed these vessels and he actually called the fluid inside them white blood.
White blood, that's so descriptive.
It is. And he had this hunch that it originated somewhere in the intestines, which, as we'll see a bit later, was incredibly perceptive of him.
But then after Hippocrates, it just sort of vanished from the medical texts for centuries, didn't it?
It completely vanished, yeah. Because lymphatic vessels are mostly transparent and they are incredibly delicate.
So if you cut someone open, you don't just see them.
No, they are very hard to spot in a standard dissection unless they're actively filled with fluid at that exact moment.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So when did it pop back up?
It wasn't until 1622. An Italian surgeon named Gasparo Aselli actually stumbled upon them again.
What was he doing?
He was dissecting animals, and he noticed these prominent, milky white structures. And similar to Hippocrates, he called them white veins.
White veins. But the story of how they finally confirmed this in a human, I thought that was just wild.
It is a morbidly perfect story for anatomical discovery.
Because later anatomists, I have their names here, Nicolas Claude Fabrice and Pierre Gassendi, they wanted to prove Aselli's white veins actually existed in people, right?
Yes. So they ended up examining a recently deceased prisoner.
But the crucial detail, like the only reason they were able to see the lymphatic system was because of what happened right before the guy died.
Exactly. The prisoner had just been given a very heavy, fat-rich meal before passing.
Because he had just eaten, his digestive tract was actively absorbing all those dietary fats as he died.
Right, and those fats were pushed directly into the lymphatic vessels in his gut.
Which turned the fluid white.
Yes, it turned the normally clear lymphatic fluid into this cloudy, milky white color. It made those invisible, transparent vessels suddenly pop out to the naked eye.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
So if he had died on an empty stomach, they probably would have missed it entirely.
They absolutely would have missed it. It really highlights how elusive this system is. It's a ghost network running parallel to our blood.
So to understand how it operates, we should probably contrast it against the cardiovascular system, just to get our bearings.
Let's do that. How do you visualize the cardiovascular system?
Okay, if I think about the cardiovascular system, I picture a high-pressure, closed-loop racetrack.
Perfect analogy.
It has a massive, highly muscular central pump, which is the heart. And that heart forcibly blasts blood out through the thick-walled arteries.
Right, and then that blood travels down to the tiny capillaries.
Yeah, and then the heart's pressure, combined with our muscle movements, it pulls it all back through the veins in this continuous, never-ending, tightly sealed circuit.
That's a great visualization. Now, the lymphatic system, by stark contrast, is fundamentally different in almost every single way.
How so?
Well, first off, it is an open-ended, one-way, incredibly low-pressure drainage canal.
Open-ended. Okay.
Yes. And the most critical structural difference, it has absolutely no central pump.
None at all?
None. There is no lymph heart driving the fluid around.
Okay, so if there's no pump and it's open-ended, where does the fluid even come from in the first place? Like, how does the water get into our internal aquarium?
It originates directly from your blood.
Really?
Yeah, let's follow the path of your blood as it leaves the heart. It travels down through the arteries, right? Which then branch into smaller arterioles and finally into the absolute smallest vessels, which are the arterial capillaries.
Okay, the tiny ones.
Right. These capillaries are microscopic, but the blood inside them is still under a significant amount of hydrostatic pressure from the heart's pumping action.
So it's like turning on a garden hose that has tiny pinpricks all over it.
Exactly like that. Because of that hydrostatic pressure, the liquid portion of your blood, the blood plasma, which is carrying all your oxygen, glucose, and nutrients, is physically forced out.
Forced out where?
Out through the ultra-thin walls of the arterial capillaries. It just leaks out into the interstitial space.
Okay, let's define that term for the listener real quick. The interstitial space is basically just the microscopic gap between your actual cells, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's the water in the aquarium.
Correct. Your cells don't actually touch the blood vessels directly. The blood vessels leak this nutrient-rich fluid into the gaps.
And then the cells just bathe in it.
They bathe in it, they absorb the oxygen and food they need from it, and then they excrete their metabolic waste right back into it.
Wow. How much fluid are we talking about here?
Every single day, your blood capillaries push out roughly 20 liters of this fluid into your tissues.
20 liters. Wait, that's like 10 large soda bottles of liquid just leaking into our flesh every day.
It is a massive volume of fluid, yeah.
But obviously, we aren't swelling up to the size of a blimp by the end of the afternoon, so that fluid has to go somewhere.
Most of it is actually immediately reclaimed by the blood system.
How does that happen if the hose is leaking?
Well, as the blood moves from the arterial side of that capillary bed over to the venous side, the hydrostatic pressure drops significantly. And at the same time, you have something called osmotic pressure kicking in.
Osmotic pressure. How does that work in this context?
Think of it as a chemical pulling force. So while the water and the small nutrients leaked out of the capillaries, the really large, heavy proteins mostly stayed trapped inside the blood vessels.
Because they were too big to fit through the pinpricks.
Exactly. And those concentrated proteins act like a sponge. They want to dilute themselves. So as the physical pumping pressure drops on the venous side, that chemical sponge effect pulls the fluid right back into the veins.
Oh, that's clever.
Out of the 20 liters that leaked out, about 18 liters get pulled right back into the blood circulation.
Okay, let me do the math here. 20 liters leak out, 18 liters get sucked back in. That leaves a daily discrepancy of 2 liters of fluid just sitting there in the tissue spaces.
Every single day.
2 liters of stagnant aquarium water, full of cellular waste. I mean, if that just sat there day after day, we would develop massive swelling, like edema, right?
Severe, life-threatening edema, yes. And this is the exact moment the lymphatic system enters the picture.
Okay, here we go.
Microscopic lymphatic capillaries are interwoven directly alongside the blood capillaries. They just sit there in the interstitial space, waiting to sweep up that remaining 10 to 15% of the fluid.
I have to say, I found the physical structure of these lymphatic capillaries to be one of the most brilliant pieces of engineering in the entire human body.
It really is elegant.
Because they aren't just solid tubes like blood vessels, are they?
Far from it. A blood capillary has this continuous solid membrane holding it together, which is why it only leaks tiny molecules like water and glucose. But lymphatic capillaries don't have that solid basement membrane.
So what do they have?
Instead, the cells that make up their walls, they're called endothelial cells, are arranged in a highly unique pattern. They actually overlap each other, much like the wooden shingles on the roof of a house.
Okay, I'm picturing these overlapping flaps, but how does the fluid actually push its way inside? Does it just sort of seep through the cracks?
It's a beautifully mechanical process. Those overlapping shingle cells are tethered to the surrounding tissue by tiny microscopic ropes.
Tiny ropes.
Yeah, they're called anchoring filaments. Now, imagine what happens when that 2 liters of leftover fluid starts to build up in the tissue.
Well, the tissue starts to swell, right? It gets physically fuller, puffier.
Yes. As the tissue swells and stretches from all that excess fluid, it pulls on those tiny rope-like anchoring filaments.
Oh, I see where this is going.
And because the filaments are attached directly to the overlapping shingles of the lymphatic capillary, the pulling action physically yanks the flaps open.
That is incredible. So as the water level rises, it automatically pulls open the drain covers.
Exactly.
They physically shift and open up like microscopic mouths.
They do. And because these flaps open so widely, they don't just take in water. This is a crucial distinction. The lymphatic capillaries can swallow massive molecules that the blood capillaries could never handle.
Like what kind of molecules?
They take in large stray proteins, dead cell fragments, metabolic waste products, environmental toxins, and even massive pathogens like bacteria and cancer cells.
Wow. They really are the garbage trucks.
Yes. And once all of that soup passes through the flap and enters the vessel, we officially stop calling it interstitial fluid, and we start calling it lymph.
And once that fluid rushes in, the swelling in the tissue goes down. The tension on those tiny ropes releases, and the overlapping shingles snap shut so the toxic soup can't leak back out.
It's a perfect, completely passive engineering solution.
It really is. But now the fluid is trapped inside this tube, and there's no heart to pump it. How does it move forward?
It moves through a system of one-way valves. The larger lymphatic collecting vessels are segmented into tiny chambers called lymphangions.
Lymphangions, okay.
And each chamber has a semilinear valve, basically a pair of flaps that only open in one direction.
Okay, so it can only go forward.
Right. When the smooth muscle in the vessel wall gently contracts, or when a nearby skeletal muscle squeezes against the vessel during physical movement, it squishes the fluid forward into the next chamber.
And then
The pressure drops, and the one-way valve snaps shut behind it, completely preventing any backward flow.
it is a unidirectional transit network. Just a one-way highway carrying waste slowly away from the tissues and up toward the chest.
Slow and steady.
But where is it taking it? We need to map out the key checkpoints in this network because it's not just a system of pipes, right? There are vital organs attached to this whole thing.
Definitely. The lymphatic system operates through both primary and secondary lymphoid organs.
Let's start with the primary organs.
So the primary organs are essentially the maternity wards and basic training camps for your immune system. This includes the bone marrow, the spongy tissue deep inside your long bones.
Right.
This is where immature immune progenitor cells are born.
And the thymus. I feel like the thymus never gets talked about.
It really doesn't, which is a shame because it is indispensable. The thymus is a small gland that sits right in the upper chest, just behind your sternum.
What happens there?
Specific immature immune cells migrate from the bone marrow to the thymus. Once there, they undergo a rigorous maturation process to become T cells.
Oh, wait. The T in T cell literally stands for thymus.
It literally does, yes.
Yeah.
This is where they learn how to identify foreign invaders and, crucially, how to not attack your own healthy tissue.
Wow. Okay, so the bone marrow and the thymus are the training grounds producing the soldiers. But where does the actual fighting happen?
The battles take place in the secondary lymphoid organs. These are the strategic outposts where mature immune cells are stationed, just waiting for the lymphatic fluid to bring the invaders right to them.
So what organs are those?
This includes the spleen, the tonsils in your throat, the specialized mucous membranes lining your gut and respiratory tracts, and of course the lymph nodes.
The lymph nodes, those are the filtration checkpoints. I think we all know the feeling of having swollen glands in our neck when we get a sore throat, right?
Exactly. And we have roughly 500 to 600 of these little bean-shaped nodes clustered all throughout our bodies.
Where are they mostly located?
They are heavily concentrated in the neck, the armpits, the groin, and deep inside the abdomen.
So think of a lymph node as a highly fortified water treatment plant.
That's a great way to put it.
As that one-way highway of lymphatic fluid travels from your feet and hands back up toward your chest, it is basically forced to flow through these nodes.
Yes, and inside each node is a dense, maze-like network filled with macrophages, dendritic cells, and B cells.
And they are just sitting there, monitoring the water flowing past them.
Endlessly monitoring. If a macrophage detects a virus, a piece of bacteria, or a mutated cancer cell in the fluid, it attacks.
It just grabs it.
It traps the pathogen, engulfs it, and triggers a massive inflammatory immune cascade to destroy the threat right there in the node.
And that's why they swell up.
Yes, this is exactly why your nodes swell when you are sick. They are literally packed with multiplying immune cells actively fighting a war.
That is so cool. Okay, so once the fluid passes through these hundreds of treatment plants, the neutralized, purified lymph finally travels up to the base of the neck.
Right.
And there, it dumps the clean fluid right back into the cardiovascular system, right into the subclavian veins just above the heart. The cycle is complete.
The aquarium water has been filtered and returned.
I love that. That structural understanding is so foundational for everything else. But now we have to ask a much deeper question.
What's that?
What happens to our most vital organs when this intricate drainage and filtration network starts to fail?
Yes. That's the perfect pivot. Let's look at how this cleanup crew interacts with our metabolism on a really deep systemic level.
Let's start with the heart. Earlier, we joked that the cardiovascular system gets all the glory while the lymph does the dirty work. But the reality is, the heart relies completely on the lymphatic system to survive, doesn't it?
It is a remarkable life-saving synergy. To really understand it, we have to look at the narrative surrounding cholesterol and heart disease.
Okay, cholesterol. We've all heard about that.
Right. For decades, we've been told about LDL cholesterol. It is frequently labeled the bad cholesterol because it has a tendency to penetrate the inner walls of our arteries, oxidize, and trigger the plaque buildup that leads to atherosclerosis and eventually heart attacks.
Right, and HDL is the good cholesterol. It's like the hero that rides in to clean up the mess.
Precisely. HDL cholesterol, working alongside those large white blood cells we mentioned earlier, the macrophages, it patrols the arterial walls.
Looking for the bad stuff.
Yes. Their job is to pick up that dangerous, embedded LDL cholesterol and remove it. But here is the critical mechanical detail that almost everyone misses.
I have a feeling this involves the lymph.
Oh, it does. Once a macrophage eats that bad cholesterol, how does it physically leave the arterial wall?
Well, I mean, it can't go back into the bloodstream, can it? Because the blood is under high pressure, and as we established earlier, the blood capillary walls are a solid, continuous membrane.
Exactly. The macrophage is just too big to squeeze back through.
It cannot return via the blood. So what's its escape route?
Its only escape route is through the lymphatic system. In the outer layer of your blood arteries, a layer called the adventitia, there's a dense network of lymphatic vessels running right parallel to the blood flow.
Okay, so they're right next door.
Yes. These adjacent lymphatics serve as the dedicated emergency exits. They absorb those bloated, cholesterol-laden macrophages and carry them safely away from the heart.
And they eventually route them back to the liver where the cholesterol can be broken down and excreted.
You've got it.
So the lymph is essentially acting as the garbage truck for the cardiovascular system itself.
Without a doubt.
But that raises a pretty terrifying question. If lymphatic vessels are the only escape route for plaque-causing cholesterol, well, what happens if those specific lymphatic pipes get clogged or damaged?
That is the million-dollar question in modern cardiology, honestly, and it explains so much about chronic cardiovascular disease.
Let's walk through it. What happens if a person has poor lifestyle habits?
Okay, let's say they smoke, they are chronically stressed, or they eat a highly inflammatory diet. Over time, those delicate, overlapping lymphatic vessels we talked about, they become inflamed.
Get damage.
They develop scar tissue, they become sclerotic, meaning they stiffen and completely lose their ability to gently pulse and clear fluid.
The one-way highway gets blocked. The emergency exit doors are jammed shut.
Yes. And when that happens, those cholesterol-loaded macrophages are completely trapped. They can't leave the arterial wall.
Oh no, so what do?
They sit there, they die, and they spill all their toxic contents right back into the wall. Chronic inflammation ensues, and plaque builds up incredibly rapidly.
Wow.
This proves that your risk of a heart attack isn't solely dictated by how much cholesterol is floating in your blood. It is heavily dependent on whether your lymphatic system is functional enough to clear the arterial walls.
That completely changes how we should think about heart health. You can't just lower blood cholesterol. You have to ensure the drainage pipes are wide open so it can actually leave.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move from the chest down into the belly, because I was amazed when I read the research on the gastrointestinal connection here.
The gut connection is fascinating because the lymphatic vessels in your digestive tract perform a biological role that is entirely unique. Everywhere else in the body, the lymph is picking up waste. But in the small intestine, it has a completely different job.
We mentioned Gasparo Uccelli earlier, and his discovery of the white veins in 1622. Those milky veins are actually highly specialized lymphatic capillaries located right inside the lining of your small intestine, right?
Yes, they are called lacteals.
Lacteals. And their job isn't to clear cellular garbage. Their job is to absorb your food.
Specifically, they absorb dietary fats. When you eat a meal with fat in it, say an avocado or a piece of salmon, your digestive enzymes break that fat down.
Makes sense.
But the resulting lipid molecules are massive. They are far too large to squeeze through the tight, solid walls of the blood capillaries in your intestine.
Oh, it's just like the macrophages.
Exactly the same problem. The same goes for large, fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin A, D, E, and K. The blood system simply rejects them because they are too big to enter.
So the body routes these massive essential fat molecules into the lacteals because those lymphatic capillaries have those overlapping shingles that can pop wide open to swallow large cargo.
You're getting the hang of it. The intestinal cells package the dietary fats into massive bundles called chylomicrons. These bundles pass easily into the highly permeable lacteals.
And that's what turns the fluid white.
Yes, the lymphatic fluid inside literally turns cloudy and white with fat. This fat-rich lymph is called chyle.
Chyle, got it.
It is then transported up through the deep abdominal vessels, initially bypassing the liver entirely, and dumped directly into the bloodstream near the heart.
It's an incredible transport mechanism.
Yeah.
But here is where the longevity and metabolic health aspect really comes in for me. Because the lymph is the exclusive transport network for dietary fat, any dysfunction in these pipes is directly tied to a major modern epidemic, right?
Yes. It is directly tied to adult-onset obesity.
Let's break down the mechanics of how that happens, because it's not just about eating too many calories, is it?
Not at all. Researchers conducted a deeply revealing study looking at the genetics of lymphatic development. They focused on mice that had a deficiency in a specific gene called the PROX1 gene.
I want to make sure I understand this part. The research mentions they were heterozygous mice. What does that mean in this specific context?
Okay. So it means they weren't entirely missing the PROX1 gene. If they were, they wouldn't have developed a lymphatic system at all, and they simply wouldn't have survived.
Okay, so they had the gene, but...
Heterozygous means they inherited one normal copy of the gene and one mutated defective copy. Think of it like having a construction blueprint where half the pages are badly smudged.
Okay, that makes sense. So they did have a lymphatic system, but because the blueprint was flawed, the system was poorly constructed.
Precisely. The PROX1 gene is a master regulator for building the walls of lymphatic vessels. Because these mice had a defective gene, they developed structural abnormalities in their lymphatics.
What kind of abnormalities?
Crucially, the vessels became exceptionally leaky. Those overlapping shingles we talked about, they didn't close properly.
Oh, so they eat a high-fat diet, the lacteals absorb the fat, but as that milky, fat-rich chyle tries to travel up the body, it just starts leaking out of the pipes.
Yes. The leaky lymphatics spill fats, specifically triglycerides, straight into the surrounding tissue of the abdominal cavity.
Just dumping pure fat into the belly.
And the tissue surrounding our organs is heavily populated by adipocytes, or fat cells.
Oh, wow. So the fat cells are just sitting there minding their own business, and suddenly it's raining triglycerides from these broken pipes.
They absolutely feast on it. The surrounding fat cells absorb these spilled lipids at a massive rate. They physically expand.
And as they expand, they cause problems.
Big problems. As they become engorged, they become dysfunctional and start releasing inflammatory cytokines, creating a state of systemic metabolic chaos.
So the mice got fat.
These PROX1 deficient mice rapidly progressed into adult-onset obesity, but not because they were overeating relative to normal mice, but simply because their internal plumbing was leaking pure fat directly into their bellies.
That is a staggering insight. It suggests that for some people, obesity or stubborn abdominal fat isn't just a simple equation of calories in versus calories out.
Right. If your lymphatic vessels are structurally compromised or inflamed, you could be storing fat and generating inflammation simply because the transport system itself is broken.
It highlights how deeply interconnected our systems are. You just cannot have a healthy metabolism with a broken lymphatic network.
It's biologically impossible.
But there is one more organ we really have to look at to truly grasp the scope of this cleanup crew. We need to talk about the brain.
Oh, this might be the most groundbreaking part of the recent research.
Because for decades, the medical consensus was that the brain was completely isolated. It was believed the brain lacked a lymphatic system entirely, right?
It was one of the great anatomical mysteries. I mean, the brain is the most metabolically active organ in the body. It generates a massive amount of toxic cellular waste every single day.
But it is encased in the hard, closed environment of the skull.
And it's separated from the rest of the body by the blood-brain barrier. So how on earth was it taking out the trash?
Well, researchers recently solved the mystery. They discovered a hidden, specialized network that is now termed the glymphatic system. Note the G at the beginning there.
Yes, the glymphatic system. The G stands for glial cells.
What are glial cells exactly?
Glial cells are essentially the support staff of the brain. They surround the neurons, they provide nutrients, and they maintain the environment.
Okay.
Researchers discovered that these glial cells orchestrate a nightly deep cleaning process. But the really fascinating part is when and how it actually happens.
It only happens when we sleep, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And not just light dozing. It has to be deep, restorative sleep. What are the glial cells physically doing during this time?
They actually undergo a physical transformation. During deep, slow-wave sleep, the glial cells shrink in size by up to 60%.
But they physically deflate.
They do. By shrinking, they drastically widen the microscopic interstitial spaces between the brain cells.
Oh, it's like opening the floodgates.
Exactly. This allows a massive rush of cerebrospinal fluid to sweep right through the brain tissue. It acts like a power washer, literally flushing out all the accumulated metabolic toxins that built up during your waking hours.
And what exactly is it flushing out? Because the sources highlight some very specific, dangerous proteins.
The most notable targets of this nightly brainwashing are beta amyloid and tau proteins.
Those sound familiar.
They should. These are the exact proteins that, if left to accumulate, clump together to form the plaques and tangles, heavily implicated in the development of Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia.
So the fluid power washes the brain,
Yeah.
clears out the Alzheimer's proteins, but then where does it go? How does it get out of the skull?
Once the cerebrospinal fluid has collected the waste, it drains out through newly discovered, very subtle lymphatic vessels located in the meninges, which are the protective membranes wrapping the brain.
And then it just goes down the neck.
From there, the fluid flows down through the skull base and empties directly into the deep cervical lymph nodes in your neck, where the immune system can finally process the waste.
That entire mechanism is just a profound realization about the absolute biological necessity of sleep.
It really changes how you view a good night's rest.
Because if you aren't getting deep sleep, your glial cells never shrink. The floodgates never open. The fluid doesn't wash through, and those toxic proteins just sit there, accumulating in your brain tissue day after day, year after year.
It all comes back to keeping the water moving, whether it's clearing cholesterol from the heart, transporting fat from the gut, or washing dementia-causing proteins out of the brain. The mechanical flow of lymphatic fluid is just the baseline requirement for organ survival.
Which brings us to the most empowering part of this deep dive. Because we've painted a pretty clear picture of how a clogged, stagnant system leads to chronic functional decline. Heart disease, obesity, neurodegeneration, they all have roots here.
They do.
But how much control do we as individuals actually have over this network? Are we just at the mercy of the genetic hand we were dealt?
For a very long time, the scientific consensus leaned heavily toward genetic determinism. The belief was that your DNA was a fixed, unchangeable blueprint.
Right, like if you had genes associated with poor lymphatic function or chronic inflammation, you were essentially doomed to experience those outcomes.
But the Human Genome Project completely shattered that idea.
I remember reading about the initial shock when the genome was finally mapped. We used to think humans, being so complex, must have at least 150,000 different genes dictating every tiny aspect of our fate.
And the final count was a massive surprise to the scientific community. It turns out humans only have about 25,000 protein-coding genes.
That's it.
That's it. We barely have more genes than a microscopic roundworm.
And initially, geneticists were totally baffled by the rest of our DNA, weren't they? They looked at the remaining 90% of the genome that didn't code for proteins and arrogantly labeled it junk DNA.
They did. They assumed it was just evolutionary baggage with no purpose.
But calling it junk was perhaps the biggest misnomer in the history of biology.
Oh, without a doubt. Because it turns out that 90% of our DNA is actually the master control board. It is the very foundation of epigenetics.
Let's clearly define epigenetics for the listener here. It's the idea that your genetic code isn't a strict, locked vault. It's more like a fluid control panel filled with thousands of dimmer switches, right?
Exactly. Epigenetics is the study of how your behaviors and your environment can cause changes that affect the way your genes work.
So it's not changing the DNA itself.
Right. Unlike genetic mutations, epigenetic changes are reversible, and they do not change your underlying DNA sequence. They simply change how your body reads that DNA sequence.
So these dimmer switches can physically turn certain genes on, expressing them,
Yep.
or turn them off, silencing them.
Precisely.
So how does that relate to our internal ocean? How does epigenetics interact with the lymphatic system?
Well, everything you do throughout your day acts as an epigenetic trigger.
Like what?
The specific foods you eat, the way you move your body, and crucially, how you manage your psychological stress. These inputs send chemical signals deep into your cells.
And those signals hit the control board.
Yes. These signals interact with that junk DNA, flipping the switches that either support the growth and flexibility of your lymphatic vessels or trigger inflammation that scars and degrades them.
Let's dive deep into the stress component, because the psychological and emotional interactions with the lymphatic system are wild.
They really are.
We tend to think of stress purely as a mental burden, just a feeling in our head. But the sources make it clear that psychological states like chronic stress, unspoken anger, and trauma physically halt lymphatic flow.
They put the brakes on entirely.
But how does an emotion physically stop a fluid from moving?
It comes down to the biomechanics of respiration. Remember the cardinal rule we established earlier? The lymphatic system has no central pump, no heart. It relies heavily on external mechanical forces to squeeze the vessels and push the fluid through those one-way valves. And the single largest, most powerful mechanical pump available to the lymphatic system is the diaphragm.
The diaphragm, the massive parachute-shaped muscle sitting right at the bottom of the rib cage, separating the lungs from the digestive organs.
Exactly. Every time you take a deep, slow breath, your diaphragm flexes and pushes downward deep into your abdomen. This creates a massive change in pressure.
It physically massages the organs, right?
Yes, it massages the organs and the large lymphatic vessels running through your core.
Most importantly, it pumps the thoracic duct, doesn't it?
Yes. The thoracic duct is the largest lymphatic vessel in the human body. It runs right up the center of your chest and carries the vast majority of the body's lymph fluid.
Okay.
So a deep diaphragmatic breath acts like a massive mechanical sponge. It squeezes the thoracic duct and violently propels the lymph upward toward the heart.
Now connect that to stress and anger. When we are stressed, anxious, or holding on to anger, what happens to our breathing?
Our nervous system shifts into a sympathetic fight or flight state. And the very first thing that happens is our breathing becomes rapid, shallow, and restricted entirely to the upper chest. The diaphragm barely moves.
We literally lose the pump.
Entirely. The diaphragm stops making those deep, plunging movements, it stops massaging the abdominal nodes, and it stops squeezing the thoracic duct.
And without that pressure, the fluid just sits there.
Without that primary mechanical pressure, the massive volume of fluid in your core simply stagnates, toxic waste accumulates, and cellular purification just grinds to a halt.
So holding on to chronic anger literally makes you toxic on a cellular level by shutting down the physical clearance mechanism.
It really does. The emotional state dictates the mechanical reality.
That is a brilliant explanation. But the flip side of that coin is incredible too. Positive emotions and specific vocalizations literally turn the faucets back on.
They do. Any activity that forces deep, sustained exhalations and profound diaphragmatic movement acts as a supercharger for lymphatic flow.
Give me an example.
Laughter is a perfect example. A deep belly laugh creates rapid, intense contractions of the diaphragm. It acts like a jackhammer on the thoracic duct, pumping huge volumes of fluid.
And singing. I love the detail in the research about orchestra conductors. It noted that classical orchestra conductors live notoriously long, healthy lives.
It makes perfect biomechanical sense when you view it through a lymphatic lens. Think about what a conductor is doing for hours every day.
Right, they're constantly elevating and moving their arms.
Which physically pumps the dense clusters of axillary lymph nodes located in their armpits. And simultaneously, they are engaged in deep, rhythmic, passionate breathing to match the tempo of the music.
Which relentlessly pumps the diaphragm as the thoracic duct.
Exactly.
But it goes even deeper than just mechanical pumping. There is a fascinating biochemical element tied to sound and emotion that I want to explore.
Oh, yes. Let's talk about the biochemistry of vocalization. Ancient practices like chanting, humming, or the classic yogic Om have been used for thousands of years for mental clarity.
But modern vascular biology has finally explained why they work physically, right?
Yes. It's not just mystical energy. It's a chemical reaction. When you hum, the physical vibration in your nasal cavity and upper airway triggers the endothelial cells to produce a very specific gas.
Nitric oxide.
Yes. The vibration of humming actively and dramatically increases the endogenous production of nitric oxide in your airways and the lining of your blood and lymphatic vessels.
And why is nitric oxide so important for our secret river?
Nitric oxide is a potent vasodilator. That means it acts as a chemical relaxant. When nitric oxide is released into the tissue, it signals the smooth muscle wrapped around the walls of the lymphatic vessels to immediately relax.
So the vessels physically expand, they widen.
Exactly. When the vessels dilate, the internal resistance drops to almost zero. The tight, stressed pipes open up, allowing significantly more lymphatic fluid to flow freely and rapidly.
Wow. So by simply taking a deep breath and humming on the exhale, you are simultaneously providing the mechanical push from the diaphragm and the chemical signal to widen the pipes so the fluid can rush through.
It's a dual action mechanism.
It beautifully bridges the gap between ancient psychological practices and cutting-edge vascular biology. Emotional well-being and mindful practices directly, physically translate to improved internal fluid circulation.
It proves that we are not passive victims of our anatomy. We can actively pilot the system.
Okay, so if our lifestyle choices and our breathing habits act as the epigenetic switches, then the actual nutrition we consume must be the raw material used to build and maintain the network.
Yes, exactly.
We need to build a cleaner internal aquarium from the inside out. Let's shift gears and talk about feeding the flow. How do we synergize nutrition with these epigenetic concepts?
To optimize the lymphatic system through nutrition, our primary goal is twofold. First, we must reduce systemic inflammation, which causes the vessels to scar and stiffen.
Right, we talked about that with the cholesterol.
And second, we must provide the specific micronutrients required to physically maintain the structural integrity of the delicate vessel walls. The research points overwhelmingly toward the Mediterranean diet as the gold standard for this.
The Mediterranean diet, it's consistently ranked as the best diet for longevity everywhere you look. Lots of high-fiber vegetables, healthy fats, fatty fish, and copious amounts of extra virgin olive oil.
Right.
But why is this specific nutritional profile so incredibly good for the lymph?
It comes down to cellular stability. Remember the PROX1 mice study? We discussed how weak, poorly constructed lymphatic walls leaked fat into the abdomen, causing obesity.
Yeah, the leaky pipes.
Well, a diet rich in plant polyphenols and omega-3 fatty acids physically stabilizes the endothelial cells that make up the walls of the lymphatic capillaries. It helps ensure those overlapping shingles stay tight and resilient, completely preventing dangerous leakage.
Let's get really practical here. Let's break down some specific nutrients. If a listener wants to build an optimized meal today, what should they be putting on their plate to keep the river clear?
The foundational rule is to eat the rainbow, because the colors in plants literally dictate their chemical properties. Let's start with dark leafy greens. Think spinach, Swiss chard, arugula, and kale.
Dark greens are famous for being packed with magnesium.
And magnesium acts on the vascular system in a very similar way to the nitric oxide we just discussed. Magnesium is a natural muscle relaxant.
Oh, so it opens the pipes too.
Yes, it acts directly on the smooth muscle lining the larger lymphatic collecting vessels. It helps them relax, which dilates the vessel, reduces resistance, and drastically enhances the smooth flow of fluid.
What about the brighter colors? Red and orange foods like pomegranates, red bell peppers, citrus fruits, and carex.
Those vibrantly colored foods are loaded with vitamin C and carotenoids. Now, we often just associate vitamin C with fighting a cold, but biologically, vitamin C is an absolute non-negotiable requirement for the synthesis of collagen.
I think most people hear collagen and immediately think of skincare, like keeping away wrinkles.
Skin is just the most visible application.
Yeah.
Internally, collagen is the primary structural scaffolding of your entire body. It is the tough, flexible protein matrix that builds the actual walls of your blood and lymphatic vessels.
You literally need it to build the plumbing.
Exactly. If you want strong, flexible pipes that can withstand pressure without leaking or bursting, your body needs a constant supply of vitamin C to manufacture that collagen scaffolding.
Okay, so greens relax the pipes, and red or orange foods physically build the pipes. What about the dark purples and blues? Blueberries, blackberries, dark cherries, purple grapes.
The dark blue and purple pigments are derived from powerful compounds called anthocyanins.
Anthocyanins.
Anthocyanins are exceptionally potent antioxidants. As our lymphatic vessels transport cellular waste and environmental toxins, the inside of the vessels are constantly exposed to free radicals that cause oxidative damage.
They get beat up from the inside.
Exactly. Anthocyanins are uniquely good at scavenging those free radicals, neutralizing them, and essentially reversing the oxidative aging process of the vessel walls. They keep the pipes young and resilient.
I love how specific that is based on color. But there is another category of food we need to touch on, which is spices. I found this part of the research fascinating because certain culinary spices act as direct medicine for the lymph.
Absolutely. We are talking about pungent, highly active spices like raw garlic, onions, turmeric, cinnamon, and cayenne pepper.
What do they do?
These spices contain intense, concentrated anti-inflammatory compounds. When they enter the bloodstream and seep into the interstitial fluid, they actively reduce the inflammatory burden that the lymphatic system has to carry, while simultaneously encouraging vasodilation.
Now, in my notes, I initially wrote down that we should think of these plant compounds, the polyphenols and flavonoids, like chemical Drano for the body. But looking closer at the biology, that feels like a terrible metaphor.
Yes, let's definitely retire the Drano metaphor. Drano is a caustic, toxic chemical. It violently burns away clogs, but in the process, it slowly destroys the plumbing itself. The endothelial cells lining your lymphatic system are microscopic, delicate, and incredibly fragile. You definitely do not want to burn them.
So what's a better way to visualize what these spices and flavonoids are doing?
Instead of a harsh acid, think of dietary flavonoids as a gentle biological degreaser paired with a fleet of microscopic street sweepers. In medical terminology, they act as lymphagogues.
Lymphagogues, I like that word. A lymphagogue is simply any substance that actively promotes the healthy production and smooth flow of lymph fluid, right?
Correct. And the research highlights a very specific scenario where these natural lymphagogues are most critical. It involves what happens to your body after you eat a very heavy, high-fat meal.
Right, let's say someone goes out and eats a massive ribeye steak with a side of buttery mashed potatoes. We know that fat has to be packaged into those giant chylomicrons and transported by the lacteals in the gut. What happens to the flow?
Well, that massive influx of fat creates an intense physiological burden. The millions of lacteals in the gut are suddenly flooded with heavy, viscous chyle.
Just thick fluid.
Extremely thick. This huge volume of dense fat can temporarily overwhelm the transport capacity of the abdominal vessels. It slows down the overall lymphatic flow significantly. It creates a massive traffic jam on the internal highway.
The fluid just gets bogged down, which probably explains why we feel so sluggish and lethargic after a huge fatty meal. The system is literally choked with fat.
Precisely. But here is where the nutritional synergy comes into play. If you consume polyphenols and flavonoids alongside that high-fat meal,
Like how?
for instance, eating a vibrant, diverse salad before the steak, adding heavy garlic and herbs to the meat, or even drinking a glass of red wine rich in the polyphenol resveratrol, those plant compounds act as chemical traffic cops.
How so?
They seep into the surrounding tissue and send signals to keep the vessels dilated. They thin the fluid slightly, and they actively stimulate the smooth muscle contractions in the lymphangians. Wow. By providing these biological degreasers alongside the fat, you prevent the vessels from constricting, keeping the fluid moving, and entirely preventing that post-meal lymphatic stagnation.
That is a brilliant biohack. You pair the heavy load with the specific nutrients needed to keep the highway clear. Okay, so nutrition provides the building blocks for flexible, healthy pipes and the chemical modulators to keep the fluid thin. But we have to come back to the cardinal rule of the lymphatic system.
It has no heart.
Exactly. It has no pump. We can use nutrition to build a pristine, perfect plumbing system. We can use breathing to dilate the pipes. But if we just sit still all day, the water in the aquarium is still going to stagnate.
It absolutely will.
We have to provide the mechanical pump ourselves. We have to physically move the body to move the fluid.
Nutrition is only half the equation. Mechanical stimulation is the vital other half. We must actively physically engage the body to optimize flow.
Let's talk about the natural pumps then. And I want to start with a movement practice that I had initially written off as just a retro fitness fad. But the biomechanics behind it are actually mind-blowing. We need to talk about rebounding.
Ah, the mini trampoline. It might look like a dusty relic from a 1980s aerobics video, but from a purely physics-based perspective, bouncing on a rebounder is arguably the single most efficient mechanical exercise for lymphatic drainage ever devised.
Because it leverages gravity in a completely unique way. When you jog on a treadmill, you are just pounding your joints. But when you bounce on a rebounder, you are subjecting your entire cellular structure to a constant rhythmic shift in gravitational force.
Let's break down the physical mechanics of a single bounce because it perfectly illustrates how we can manipulate those internal one-way valves.
Okay, let's walk through it.
When you push off the mat and accelerate upward, your body is fighting gravity. The G-force increases.
Then you hit the apex, the absolute top of the bounce.
At that exact moment at the top of the bounce, your body experiences a split second of total weightlessness, zero gravity. The heavy lymphatic fluid suspended in your vertical vessels suddenly becomes weightless.
And then you drop.
You drop. And as your feet hit the mat and you decelerate, your body experiences a sudden, massive surge of increased G-force, often double or triple your normal body weight.
How does that violent shift in G-force interact with the fluid inside those overlapping shingles and the one-way valves?
It acts as an incredibly powerful mechanical milking action. The sudden deceleration at the bottom of the bounce forces the heavy, waste-filled interstitial fluid aggressively into the lymphatic capillaries.
It's like squeezing a wet towel.
Yes. Then the upward acceleration pushes that column of fluid straight up your legs and torso. The one-way valves blow wide open to let it rush upward.
And when gravity tries to pull that fluid back down into your ankles,
the one-way valves instantly snap shut. The fluid is tracked at a higher level. With every single rhythmic bounce, you are literally milking the fluid up your body, chamber by chamber, defying gravity and forcing it toward the chest to be cleared.
it is a massive mechanical assist.
Yeah.
And the data supporting this is not just anecdotal, it's aerospace grade.
You are referring to the NASA study.
Yes. I was amazed to find that NASA invested heavily in studying trampolines. Why was this space agency so interested in rebounding?
Because NASA had a massive lymphatic problem on their hands. When astronauts go into space, they lose the constant downward pull of Earth's gravity.
Right.
Without gravity to help create resistance and without the impact of walking, the astronauts' lymphatic fluids stopped draining properly from their upper bodies. Their faces became puffy and swollen, and their immune systems were severely compromised.
So they needed a fix for when they came back.
Exactly. NASA needed to find the most efficient way to re-stimulate fluid flow and maintain bone density upon their return to Earth.
And what did their research find?
The NASA study concluded that exercising on a trampoline is 68% more biomechanically efficient than jogging on a treadmill. It provides maximum cardiovascular and lymphatic stimulation with minimal trauma to the joints.
That is incredible. But the benefits extend way beyond just burning calories or helping astronauts. There was an Italian study in the research that looked specifically at pain management.
Yes, and the implications of that study are profound for anyone dealing with chronic inflammation. The Italian researchers took subjects suffering from chronic pain conditions and had them engage in short bouts of rebounding.
Yeah, what happened?
The results were staggering. The study demonstrated that jumping on a trampoline decreased subjective pain severity by up to 88% in the subjects.
An 88% reduction in pain just from bouncing up and down? I have to ask for the mechanism there. How does moving fluid cure pain?
Think about what causes chronic pain in a joint or a muscle in the first place. It is usually an accumulation of inflammatory cytokines, lactic acid, and cellular debris just irritating the nerve endings.
So it's a buildup of garbage.
By subjecting the body to the massive G-force shifts of rebounding, the subjects were forcibly flushing those pain-triggering chemicals out of the stagnant tissues, pushing them into the lymphatic system and clearing them from the area entirely.
You are physically washing the inflammatory chemicals away from the nerves.
Exactly. The physical movement accelerates the clearance of the biochemical root cause of the pain. And the best part is that it doesn't take an hour of grueling exercise to achieve this.
How long does it take?
The research suggests that just 5 to 10 minutes a day, or roughly 50 to 100 gentle jumps, is enough to artificially provide the powerful pump the lymphatic system lacks.
That is wildly actionable. But I want to explore the other end of the movement spectrum here. Because rebounding is very much a high-intensity, active, sympathetic nervous system activity. It's the yang, so to speak. We also need to look at mindful, slow movement, the yin, which acts on the system in a completely different yet equally vital way.
You are talking about the mechanisms behind classical yoga. And it's really important to distinguish classical slow yoga from high-intensity, fast-paced power yoga fitness classes. Classical yoga operates on a fascinating neurological principle involving something called the Golgi tendon organs.
Okay, let's break that down. I've heard of muscles and tendons, but what exactly are Golgi tendon organs?
They are tiny, highly sensitive sensory receptors located exactly at the junction where your muscle fibers merge into your tendons. Their primary job is to monitor muscle tension and protect you from tearing a muscle.
How do they do that during normal exercise? Let's say I'm lifting a heavy weight or sprinting.
During high-intensity, rapid exercise, or even just when you are chronically stressed and holding your body tight, the Golgi tendon organs sense that rapid stretching and high tension.
And what do they do?
In response, they reflexively fire signals to the spinal cord, telling the surrounding muscles to contract, stiffen, and tighten up to protect the joint from being hyperextended or injured.
It's an automatic defense mechanism. The body tightens up to armor itself.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But here is the problem for the lymphatic system. Your delicate lymphatic vessels run directly through and between these muscle bellies. When your muscles are chronically tight, clenched, and armored, they physically compress the lymphatic vessels.
They squeeze the soft pipes flat.
Yes. They severely restrict the flow of fluid.
It's literally like stepping on a garden hose.
Exactly. Now look at how classical yoga works. Classical yoga utilizes incredibly slow, sustained, highly mindful movements held for long periods while engaging in deep breathing.
Right.
Because the movement into the stretch is so agonizingly slow and deliberate, it completely bypasses the activation threshold of the Golgi tendon organs.
Oh, you sneak past the alarms.
You do. The slow movement essentially whispers to the Golgi bodies, it's safe. There's no sudden trauma happening. You can stand down.
And when the alarms stand down, the muscle finally genuinely relaxes.
Yes. The neurological grip releases, the muscle fibers elongate and soften, and the physical compression on the internal structures disappears. By using slow yoga to induce deep neurological muscle relaxation, you are physically creating more spatial room inside your tissues for the lymph vessels to expand, fill with waste, and clear it away. You are opening the highway from a congested single lane back up to a wide-open 3-lane expressway.
That is a beautiful way to understand flexibility. It's not just about touching your toes. It's about making internal space for fluid to flow. And certain specific yoga poses are actually engineered to manipulate gravity and lymphatic pooling, right?
Yes, many asanas or poses were developed intuitively centuries ago to address fluid stagnation. A primary example is the shoulder stand, which some ancient texts actually refer to as the all-members pose because its benefits are completely systemic.
Describe what is physically happening to the fluids during a shoulder stand.
Well, in a shoulder stand, you are lying on your back and extending your legs and lower torso straight up into the air, supporting your weight on your upper shoulders.
Right.
You are completely inverting the lower half of the body. Humans spend the vast majority of our lives upright, either sitting or standing. Over decades, gravity mercilessly pulls lymphatic fluid and venous blood down into our legs, ankles, and lower abdomen.
Which is why we get puffy ankles after a long flight or a day on our feet.
Exactly. By inverting the body in a shoulder stand, you are completely reversing the gravitational polarity. You are allowing gravity to act as a vacuum, effortlessly pulling that heavy, stagnant fluid out of the extremities and the pelvic basin.
And then it just drains.
Yes, draining it rapidly down the torso and dumping it directly into the thoracic duct in the chest where it can be immediately filtered and returned to the heart.
You literally just turn the hourglass upside down.
Yeah.
What about poses that target the organs? My notes mention the bow pose.
The bow pose is exceptional for the deep abdominal lymphatics. In this pose, you lie flat on your stomach, bend your knees, reach back, and grab your ankles. As you pull, your chest and thighs lift off the floor, so you are balancing entirely on your belly.
And then you rock back and forth with your breath, right?
Yes. As you rock on your abdomen, you are applying intense, direct mechanical pressure to the deep abdominal organs, the liver, the stomach, and crucially, the massive, dense network of mesenteric lymph nodes hidden deep in your gut.
You are wringing them out like a wet sponge.
That is the exact mechanism. You are physically massaging organs that otherwise never get touched. This forced compression wrings stagnant lymph out of highly metabolic organs like the pancreas, flushing away cellular debris and profoundly enhancing metabolic health and digestive efficiency.
I absolutely love how actionable rebounding and yoga are. But I want to pause here and offer some genuine pushback.
Okay, let's hear.
We've painted a picture where bouncing on a trampoline and doing deep inverted yoga poses are the keys to longevity. But what if a listener is chronically ill? What if someone is recovering from a severe viral infection, or struggling with chronic fatigue syndrome, or is literally bedridden? They're completely exhausted. Telling them to go jump on a trampoline or do a shoulder stand isn't just unhelpful, it's impossible. What is the mechanism for clearance when you have zero energy to move?
That is a critically important question. The reality is that the people who need lymphatic drainage the most are often the ones least capable of vigorous physical exertion. But biology provides a backdoor.
A backdoor.
Yes, there is a clinical low-energy answer that doesn't require massive physical output. It involves targeting the superficial lymphatic vessels through specific neurolymphatic reflex points.
This brings us to the research surrounding manual stimulation. The sources outline a very specific technique called the Donna Eden manual flush. How does this work if you are just lying in bed?
The work of Donna Eden and various schools of applied kinesiology highlight that the body has specific reflex points that are neurologically and physically connected to the lymphatic flow of specific organ systems. You can think of these points like electrical circuit breakers.
So when the system is overwhelmed with illness or fatigue, the circuit breakers trip.
Exactly. When toxic load is high and physical movement stops, the energy and fluid become stagnant. The circuit breakers trip, and the system shuts down to conserve energy. You feel intensely sluggish, your brain gets foggy, your limbs feel heavy, your internal garbage trucks are essentially parked in the depot.
To restart them, you don't need a trampoline. You can perform a manual flush.
Yes, even lying flat in bed, a person can use their own hands to vigorously massage and stimulate these specific reflex points.
Walk me through where these points are located. If I'm feeling totally wiped out, where do I press?
One of the largest and most accessible meridians runs right down the outside of your legs. Imagine the seam of your pants running from your hip bone straight down the outside of your thigh to your knee. That entire line is rich in neurolymphatic reflex points that connect to the large intestine and the lower body drainage pathways.
And there are points on the hands too, right?
Yes, another major set of points is located on the thumbs, specifically the fleshy base of the thumb and the webbing between the thumb and forefinger. These also correspond to the large intestine meridian and upper body drainage.
Now, the sources mention something very specific about what happens when you first try to massage these points. If you are toxic, it's not going to feel like a spa massage, is it?
Far from it. When you first palpate these points, especially down the sides of the thighs, they will likely feel incredibly tender, bruised, or even sharply painful, even if you haven't bumped your leg.
What is that pain signaling?
That intense tenderness is a direct biological indicator of severe lymphatic congestion in that specific meridian. The tissues are swollen with trapped inflammatory waste. By using your knuckles to vigorously rub and massage these tender areas, you are mechanically breaking up the stagnant fluid and physically stimulating the underlying superficial lymphatic capillaries.
You are manually yanking those overlapping shinkles open to force the garbage in.
Exactly. You are forcing the local uptake of waste, and the systemic results can be immediate and profound.
The anecdotal reports in the sources are amazing. People report that after doing this manual flush daily, fighting through that initial tenderness and clearing out all that toxic debris, they experience a sudden, massive rush of energy.
The sources explicitly note that people compare the mental clarity and the physical energy return to a fasting high.
A fasting high, that makes total sense.
Right. When you fast, your body aggressively clears out dead cells and toxins, resulting in a surge of clean energy. The manual flush achieves a very similar physiological state by artificially restarting the garbage trucks. It unequivocally proves that you don't need intense, exhausting exercise to stimulate flow. Targeted, mindful touch can be a highly effective, life-changing alternative for those who are physically compromised.
So we have mapped out an incredible daily protocol here. We have nutrition, building the pipes, breathing, dilating them, and movement or manual touch pumping the fluid. These are amazing, proactive, daily habits to create a cleaner internal aquarium.
They really are the foundation.
But we have to be realistic and address the clinical side of things. Sometimes, despite our best habits, the system suffers severe trauma. What happens when the river physically floods?
This is where we have to shift our perspective from daily holistic self-care to necessary clinical intervention. Because when the lymphatic system is structurally damaged or compromised, whether due to surgical removal, harsh radiation, or congenital genetic defects, the fluid doesn't just get a little stagnant.
It gets much worse.
It accumulates rapidly and massively in the tissues, causing severe disfiguring swelling. This pathological state is known as lymphedema.
And the absolute key to managing lymphedema is early detection. You want to catch it before the tissue permanently stretches and scars. What are the early warning signs of a failing drainage system that people should be looking out for, even before they see visible swelling?
The early indicators are often entirely subjective, meaning the patient feels them before a doctor can physically see them. Long before a limb visibly balloons in size, patients frequently report a strange sensation of tightness, aching, or a dull heaviness in an arm or a leg. It literally feels like the limb is full of lead.
And the tissue itself actually changes texture, right?
Yes. If you press on the skin, the tissue might feel slightly denser, firmer, or more fibrous to the touch. Clinicians call this an increased tissue consistency. The fluid is building up and creating internal hydrostatic pressure.
And there might be subtle signs in everyday life, like
Yeah.
suddenly your rings are uncomfortably tight, or your watch strap needs to be loosened, or the sleeve of your jacket feels inexplicably snug on one side but not the other.
Exactly. Those are the early, subtle indicators that the interstitial fluid is rising because the local lymphatics are failing to clear the daily 2-liter surplus.
Now, we need to talk about who is most at risk here, because the clinical sources highlight a very specific, highly vulnerable demographic: breast cancer survivors.
It is one of the most profound and difficult clinical challenges of oncology today. When a patient undergoes surgery for breast cancer, the surgeon frequently has to perform an axillary lymph node dissection. They physically cut out and remove the clusters of lymph nodes in the armpit to biopsy them and check if the cancer has metastasized.
But those nodes in the armpit are the primary filtration plants for all the fluid draining out of that entire arm.
They are. By removing those nodes, the surgeon is physically severing the primary lymphatic highway for the entire upper extremity. The fluid trying to leave the arm suddenly hits a complete dead end.
And to make matters worse, that surgery is almost always followed by radiation therapy to kill any remaining cancer cells.
And radiation is deeply traumatic to delicate tissues. It causes massive inflammation and subsequent scarring sclerosis of whatever fragile lymphatic vessels manage to survive the surgery. When you combine the physical roadblock of node removal with the widespread scarring of radiation, the risk of structural failure just skyrockets.
The statistics in the sources are devastating. Patients who undergo both node removal and localized radiation face a 40 to 75% risk of developing permanent, debilitating arm lymphedema.
40 to 75%. It is a massive, life-altering secondary condition that they have to manage for the rest of their lives. So the question becomes, how does the medical community physically intervene when the internal plumbing is that catastrophically compromised.
I was reviewing a very comprehensive clinical analysis of this exact issue in the materials. It's the SBU Alert report out of Sweden. They meticulously evaluated the effectiveness of different clinical treatments for managing arm lymphedema following breast cancer. Let's break down their findings. What is the standard baseline medical treatment that every patient gets?
The foundational medical treatment, the absolute baseline, relies heavily on external compression therapy. This typically involves the patient wearing tightly fitted, custom-measured elastic sleeves or the application of complex, multi-layered inelastic bandaging wrapped tightly around the affected arm.
How does squeezing the arm with a tight sleeve actually help the missing lymph nodes?
It is an external physics solution to an internal biology problem. By applying firm, graduated external pressure to the skin, the compression garment artificially increases the pressure in the interstitial tissues. Remember, fluids move from high pressure to low pressure. The tight sleeve physically crushes the swollen tissue, forcing the accumulated stagnant fluid out of the interstitial spaces and pushing it into whatever microscopic lymphatic and venous capillaries are still functioning in the area.
So it prevents the arm from refilling like a water balloon. It manages the sheer volume of liquid.
Exactly. It prevents further fluid accumulation and protects the skin from stretching to the point of tearing.
But the Swedish report didn't just look at compression. They specifically wanted to evaluate what happens when you combine that tight compression therapy with a clinical technique called manual lymph drainage. What exactly is that?
Clinical manual lymph drainage, or MLD, is very different from a deep tissue massage you might get at a spa. It is a highly specific, incredibly gentle, skin-stretching massage technique performed by a specially certified lymphedema therapist.
Why does it have to be so gentle? Why not just knead the muscles and force the fluid out?
Because the initial lymphatic capillaries, the ones with the overlapping shingles, are located superficially, just a millimeter or two beneath the surface of the skin. If you press too hard, you instantly crush them flat, completely preventing them from taking up fluid. MLD uses a very light, rhythmic stretching motion on the skin.
It's mimicking the gentle pulling of those tiny anchoring filaments.
Precisely. The therapist is manually pulling the skin to open the overlapping flaps. They then use very specific directional strokes to manually push the trapped fluid away from the dead end of the surgically removed armpit nodes, routing it across the chest or back toward healthy, functioning lymph node basins in the opposite armpit or the groin.
They are acting as an intelligent external pump, rerouting the traffic around the collapsed bridge. So the ultimate question the SBU report sought to answer: does combining this specialized massage with the tight compression sleeves work better than just wearing the sleeves alone?
The report is very objective in its findings. It determined that there is what they classify as grade 3 evidence, which denotes limited but scientifically supportive evidence showing that combining manual lymph drainage with standard compression therapy is superior for short-term outcomes.
Superior in what way?
It reduces the total volume of edema, the actual measurable swelling of the arm, significantly more effectively immediately following the treatment cycle compared to patients who only used compression alone.
So in the immediate short term, after leaving the clinic, the arm shrinks considerably more. That has to be a huge relief for the patient's mobility and comfort.
It is profoundly beneficial for immediate symptom relief and improving the elasticity of the skin. However, the report is rigorous in its caveats. It explicitly notes that while the short-term volume reduction is excellent, there is currently no definitive evidence to prove that this extra shrinkage is a permanent long-term effect.
Meaning, if the patient stops going to the therapist for the massage and stops wearing their compression sleeve, the fluid is just going to inevitably pull back up because the underlying structural damage to the nodes is permanent.
Correct. The swelling will inevitably return. Which brings up a very real conversation about healthcare economics and the burden placed on the patient. The Swedish report calculated the financial impact, estimating that adding a standard clinical cycle of 5 to 10 manual lymph drainage sessions adds an extra cost of approximately 4,000 Swedish kronor to the treatment plan.
Which raises a really tough question about cost effectiveness. If the clinical massage provides amazing immediate relief but doesn't permanently cure the condition on its own, it highlights a crucial reality about chronic disease management.
It absolutely does. And this is the vital takeaway from the clinical data. Manual drainage is highly effective for crisis management and volume reduction, but it underscores the absolute necessity of combining intermittent clinical therapies with relentless, ongoing daily lifestyle management.
You can't just pay a professional for a massage once a week and think you are cured. You have to take ownership. You have to go home, put on your compression sleeve, do your deep diaphragmatic breathing to create the internal vacuum, eat your polyphenol-rich foods to build collagen, and keep bouncing on your rebounder.
Exactly. Clinical intervention manages the severe structural crises, but your daily epigenetic choices maintain the overall baseline of health. Maintaining your lymphatic flow isn't a quick fix. It is a lifelong, daily commitment to cellular fluid purification. It is the defining mechanism that slows down cellular aging.
So let's step back and bring all this together. Let's summarize the massive journey we've taken today. We started with a very simple request: to reimagine the human body as a walking aquarium.
And through every biological layer we explored, we saw that the health of the trillions of cells suspended in that aquarium relies completely fundamentally on maintaining clean, moving fluid circulation.
We've learned that the lymphatic system is so much more than a passive sewer pipe. It is the secret river of health. It is the primary transport mechanism for dietary fats. It is the exclusive escape route for cholesterol leaving the heart. It is the power washer that clears Alzheimer's proteins from the brain. Optimal lymph flow is the fundamental mechanism for human longevity.
And maintaining that flow requires proactive, intentional engagement. It requires you to make daily epigenetic choices. It requires you to recognize that since the system has no heart, you must act as the natural pump. You pump it through deep, stress-free diaphragmatic breathing, through mindful movement like classical yoga, and through mechanical practices like rebounding or manual self-massage.
And it requires you to intentionally feed the flow. You build the scaffolding with vitamin C, you relax the pipes with magnesium, and you use the biological degreasers, the polyphenols, the garlic, the turmeric, to keep the vessels wide open and clear of inflammatory aging debris. Keeping this internal river clear is the ultimate baseline for supporting long-term vitality.
It truly is the defining line between aging gracefully, with energy and cognitive clarity, and slowly suffering from the chronic functional decline that plagues modern society.
It has been a massive, incredibly dense deep dive today. We've covered anatomy, metabolism, epigenetics, and clinical interventions. But before we sign off, there is one final, provocative thought we want to leave you with, a concept for you to mull over as you go about your week.
Think back to our discussion on the brain. We explored the newly discovered lymphatic system, the dedicated biological mechanism that washes out the brain's toxic cellular waste, specifically clearing the heavy proteins linked to Alzheimer's and dementia.
And the crucial detail was that this vital brainwashing process only happens effectively during deep, slow-wave sleep, when the glial cells physically shrink to open the floodgates and let the fluid rush in.
Now, consider the reality of the modern world we live in. We are living through an unprecedented global epidemic of chronic sleep deprivation. We stay up late staring at blue light screens. We set alarms to wake up long before our bodies are ready. We consume massive amounts of caffeine to mask the fatigue. And we have built a corporate culture that actively prioritizes constant hustle and productivity over rest.
And simultaneously, in exact parallel to this loss of sleep, we are witnessing a terrifying exponential rise in neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia across the globe.
The provocative question we must all ask ourselves is this: by participating in a modern culture that systematically devalues sleep, are we actively mechanically causing our own brains to drown in their own metabolic waste? Are we simply stubbornly refusing to give our internal ocean the physical time and space it requires to clean the single most complex, vital organ we possess?
It is a terrifying thought, but also an incredibly empowering reminder to fiercely protect your rest. Because if you want to protect your mind, your memories, and your future, you have to protect your internal ocean. Keep the water clean, keep it moving, and for the love of your brain, get some sleep. We'll see you next time.